Hi, we're out on our range today, and we're talking about bolt-action rifles and their role as home defense firearms. Now, before we go any farther, there's two things we have to discuss. One, we are talking about bolt-action rifles in their role as home defense firearms. We are not talking about WROL or Tiatuaki or combat deployments or hunting, just about home defense. Two, there's a fair number of people out there who aren't really familiar with the term bolt-action rifle or what that means or how those rifles work. So it requires a very brief demonstration. Let's take a look. This is a Marlin Model 30AS rifle similar to their 336 series. And this piece right here that locks up behind the chamber is called the bolt. And you activate this rifle by working this lever. So this rifle is called lever action. This is a Mossberg Shockwave, and this piece right here that locks up behind the chamber is called the bolt. And you activate this firearm by sliding this forestock back and forth. So this is called a slide action firearm, sometimes called pump action. This is a Remington Model 783, and this piece that locks into place behind the chamber is called the bolt. To activate this rifle, you grab this handle and turn the bolt up, pull it back, push it forward to chamber around, and then turn it back down to lock it into place. So this rifle is called a turn bolt action, which over the years has just been shortened to bolt action. Now this particular rifle utilizes detachable box magazines. We put in our magazine, turn our bolt, chamber around, turn it back down to lock it into place, ensure that the safety is on, and then off we go. But a lot of bolt action rifles do not utilize detachable box magazines. Let me show you another rifle. This is a Winchester Model 70 in caliber .375 H&H Magnum, and it works a little differently than the Remington I just showed you. First, the Remington allows you to operate the bolt while the safety is engaged. This Winchester does not. If the safety is on, it will not fire, and the bolt cannot be operated. If the safety is off, obviously it can fire, and the bolt can operate. This safety also has a third position halfway between the first two where the rifle will not fire, but the bolt can be operated. Now the way this rifle loads is, you put one round at a time into the magazine. You have to make sure you click these rounds in place, but you got to get them in the right place. If you put it in too far forward, the round will go in, but then the next one won't. This rifle has a magazine capacity of 3, so I've got 3 rounds in it. If I want to have a 4th in the chamber, I'll put it in the feed tray and then just push it down a little bit, and then I can chamber that round, put my safety all the way on, and off I go. Now to unload this rifle, I can put my safety halfway on and work the bolt a few times, or I can press this button on the bottom, pop off that floor plate, and then catch those 3 rounds coming out of there. Now you'll notice one of those rounds fell on the ground, very common. I found that pretty much never can I actually catch all 3 of them. I also have to remember there's a round in the chamber, put my safety in the halfway position, and catch that round coming out of the chamber. I have found that the great majority of modern bolt-action hunting rifles operate like this, or at least similarly to this. But there's one more type of bolt-action rifle I want to show you. This is a Mosin Nagant. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and it's an old-school military bolt-action rifle. Let me show you how this one works. You open your bolt, and you'll load your rounds in the top, 1 round at a time, similarly to the way I did it with the Model 70. This rifle has a magazine capacity of 5. I'm not going to put all 5 in there. Once you get all 5 in there, you close your bolt, and then you can engage your safety by pulling this back, rotating it counterclockwise, letting it go forward. And then off you go. Now to unload this rifle, I'll press this button on the floor plate, opening the floor plate, catch those rounds. Again, that can sometimes be precarious to catch all of them. Close the floor plate, and then I'll take the round out of the chamber, which requires me to disengage the safety, open the bolt, and catch that round. Works similarly to the way other bolt-action rifles work. However, because this is a military bolt-action rifle, it can use strip clips. Unfortunately, this rifle isn't mine, it belongs to one of the crew, and he didn't have any strip clips, so I can't show you how they work on this rifle, but I can demonstrate the concept of strip clips with a different rifle. Hold on just a moment. This is an SKS rifle. It's not bolt action, but it will allow me to demonstrate how strip clips work. First, make sure your safety is engaged, then lock your bolt to the rear. Then you get your strip clip. For the SKS, it holds 10. Typically for your old school military bolt actions, it'll hold 5, and it's just a piece of metal that holds your rounds. Now on the top of the rifle, there's a notch in which the strip clip fits. Then you push these rounds in. Sometimes it can be difficult to push them all in. You get them in there, take your strip clip out, you can just throw it away or keep it to use later. Then allow your bolt to go forward and you're in business. Obviously, this is a lot faster than using loose rounds. And as far as I know, the great majority of old school military bolt action rifles are set up to use strip clips, while the great majority of modern hunting bolt action rifles are not. So now that we understand just a little bit about how bolt action rifles work, the next thing we have to discuss is why. Why would you select a bolt action rifle as your home defense firearm? When I ask that, some people immediately understand why you would do that. However, there are other people, as has been demonstrated many times in the past, who have a great deal of difficulty comprehending why someone would select a particular firearm for a particular task when they consider that firearm to be less than ideal. And so for those people who do understand the concept, I'm going to ask you to please be patient with the people who have a lot of difficulty understanding that concept. And in answering the question, why would you select a bolt action rifle for home defense, I'm going to start with a demonstration of shooting bolt action rifles alongside some other types of firearms that someone might select for home defense at what I would consider typical home defense distances and comparing the results. Let's take a look. We've got our favorite target, soda jug, set up at 7 yards. Speaking specifically of home defense shootings, the range is going to be short. In my opinion, the overwhelming majority of these shootings will occur at 7 yards or less. So at this distance, we'll see how well our bolt action rifle compares to some other types of firearms that I think might be common choices for home defense firearms. And we'll start with our Ruger 5.56 and caliber 5.56 NATO. Let's try another type of firearm. Now let's try our Mossberg Shockwave 12 gauge. And yes, I have earplugs in. Marlin lever action 30-30. He jumped off the table before I could shoot him. Winchester Model 88 and caliber .308 Winchester. Smith & Wesson Model 638 in caliber .38 Special. Yeah, those are both hits. And now our Remington Model 783 bolt action rifle, caliber .223 Remington. And one more firearm, our Mosin Nagant. So what can we take from that demonstration? Probably several things. I want to start with, there are some people who make the claim that bolt action rifles are inherently more accurate than other actions like lever action and semi-auto. Some people will greatly debate that claim. But even if that claim is correct, it's really not giving you any advantage at home defense distances. Now in our demonstration, what we saw was that our bolt action rifles were clearly slower than every other firearm. Obviously, the pump action and semi-auto firearms had a little bit of an advantage, but even the lever actions and the double action revolver were faster than our bolt action rifles. Now, people can say that, having the scope on the Remington 783 worked against me. Remember, there was a scope on the Winchester 88 lever action, and it was still clearly faster than the bolt action. There wasn't a scope on the Mosin Nagant, and it was still very slow. There's also the matter of reloading firearms. Now, we saw in our demonstration of how bolt actions work that our hunting types that you load with one round can be pretty slow to load, pretty slow to reload. Our Remington 783 we used in our soda jug test has a detachable box magazine, and that can in some cases give you an advantage, but there's a couple of things that go with that. First, just about every person I have ever met that has a bolt action rifle with a detachable box magazine only has one magazine. So changing magazines becomes moot. And even if you had multiple magazines, those types of rifles aren't really designed for rapid magazine changes. They're not set up for rapid mag changes like AR platforms or Mini 14s or many other types of rifle would be. Even my double action revolver, if I had to reload it really quickly, as long as I've got a speed loader, I'm going to be able to reload that faster than I can reload a bolt action rifle, even if I'm changing magazines on the bolt action rifle. Arguably, the double action revolver with a speed loader is going to be faster than our military type bolt actions with strip clips. There's another thing when it comes to reloading as well. Let me show you something. In discussing reloading, I want to start by saying that in legitimate, citizen-involved, self-defense, home defense type shootings, reloading is very often not part of what happens. But we have to train and prepare that it could happen. And in reloading, there's a lot of different terminology for a lot of different things, and people will talk about speed reload and emergency reload and so forth. But there's two types of reload that I want to discuss as they pertain to today's topic, and that is tactical reloading and top-off loading. Some people will argue that it's the same thing, but for today I'm going to consider them different. Now, tactical reloading is the concept that you're in a situation, fire a couple of rounds, fire a couple of rounds, fire a couple of rounds. Now I've got a lull in the action, and I'm going to take this moment to reload my pistol, taking out the partially loaded magazine, putting in a fully loaded magazine, so I'm fully loaded again. The tactical reload. Top-off loading is the same concept, done a little differently. Let me show you what I mean. Pump-action firearms like the Mossberg Shockwave can very easily be top-off loaded. After you've fired a couple of shots, whenever you have a moment, you can just stick in another round. Lever-action rifles can sometimes be top-off loaded very easily as well. Let me show you what I mean. If a lever-action rifle has a traditional tube magazine under the barrel and a loading gate, it can very easily be top-off loaded. After firing a shot, you can just grab another round and put it into your rifle. This works even better if you're a lefty. I can be aimed in on the target, ready to fire, and still top-off loading. This is something that lever-action rifles can do that typically bolt-action rifles don't do nearly as well. Again, let me show you what I mean. So with the Mosin, I could shoot all 5 rounds and then reload, and if I had a strip clip, that could be a fairly fast process. But what about top-off loading? That's a little bit different. With the lever-action rifle, I can have the hammer cocked and be ready to go, and as I'm putting that round in, if I'm getting interrupted and have to fire, I can just drop the round and fire. With the pump shotgun, as I'm putting that round into top-off load, if I'm interrupted, I can just drop that round and fire. But if I wanted to top-off load the Mosin after firing 1 or 2 shots, now, if I want to top-off load, the first thing that happens is, as I open my action, I eject a live round. That's kind of working against myself. Then, as I'm putting this one in, if I get interrupted, that round's kind of halfway in there. I got to shove it in there and get... Bolt-action rifles don't really lend themselves to top-off loading. There's a topic I'm going to discuss in a few minutes, but I have to mention it now because I'm sure there are already people thinking about how I'm doing it terribly wrong. And that is, when I'm working the action on the Mosin, instead of leaving it in my shoulder and bringing the rifle down, we're going to discuss that point. So hold off on being pedantic for just a few minutes. So what we've seen so far shows us that bolt-action rifles are slow to load, slow to fire, slow to reload, don't lend themselves well to top-off loading, and they can be really big, cumbersome firearms, not very practical for the confines of inside your house. There is a particular type of bolt-action rifle that's commonly called a scout rifle, and they tend to be carbine length. They tend to have greater magazine capacity than your average military bolt-action rifle or hunting rifle. And often they have a design that lends themselves to rapid magazine changes. So they do alleviate some of the problems of bolt-action rifles, but they're still bolt-action rifles. And so it would appear that your bolt-action rifle, when compared to an auto-loading handgun, an auto-loading rifle, a revolver, a pump shotgun, that your bolt-action rifle seems to be a poor choice as a home defense firearm. Which brings us right back to, why would someone choose a bolt-action rifle as a home defense firearm? There's probably many reasons, but I want to discuss what I would consider to be the main two. And first and foremost, the reason is because that's the only firearm someone has available to them. Now that seems like a pretty simple concept, but it's been demonstrated to me many times that that's a concept that a lot of people really don't understand. A while ago we did a presentation on cap and ball revolvers for concealed carry personal protection home defense. Now, why would you choose a cap and ball revolver when you could have many other types of handguns? And the main reason is because of your finances or your personal legal situation or your local laws, this may be the only firearm available to you. Now, when we published that presentation, I was contacted by various people from various countries who told me that in their country, owning a cap and ball revolver is very easy to do. There's very few restrictions, and you can get them. Owning any other type of handgun is almost impossible. So you would have this type of firearm because it's the only handgun available to you. Now that seems like a very simple concept to understand, but it is a concept that a lot of people have difficulty grasping. And when I say someone would have a bolt-action rifle because that's the only firearm available to them, I get commentary from people saying, well, then they should go get another firearm. Okay, you miss the point that that's the only firearm available to you. Now, a concept that a lot of people have difficulty understanding is the concept that firearms laws can vary greatly from one country to the next. Even here in the United States, firearms laws can vary greatly from one state to the next, even one city to the next. And there are a lot of people who have difficulty understanding that. I have on several occasions discussed handgun hunting for deer. And when I do, I get hate mail from people telling me that I'm unethical and that I'm a criminal because hunting deer with a handgun is illegal. Well, it may be illegal in the jurisdiction where you live, but in the jurisdiction in which I reside, it's perfectly legal. Firearms laws can vary greatly from one jurisdiction to the next. And in some jurisdictions, there are laws in place that allow people to have firearms that were grandfathered in, but it's very difficult for them to buy firearms. And so in those jurisdictions, you'll see a lot of people with a lot of old firearms. And sometimes people will have a bolt-action rifle because that's the only firearm they have. Another reason that people will have bolt-action rifles as opposed to something else are financial reasons. It's still part of, that's what you have because it's the only thing available to you. There are some people who don't have the financial resources to run out and buy the latest, greatest thing. I have been contacted by many people who have told me that there was a point in their life where their home defense firearm was a Mosin Nagant rifle because at that time they were very inexpensive, the ammunition was readily available and very inexpensive, and that's all they could afford. There are some people who have firearms because they can't afford to go buy them, but they happen to have some junked car that they traded to somebody for his bolt-action rifle. And it goes on and on. A lot of people only have firearms because that's what they inherited. A while ago I was out hunting, ran into someone who was bird hunting, and he was using a Stevens side-by-side double-barreled 16 gauge. Certainly adequate to the task, but not the firearm a lot of people would choose these days. And he happened to mention that that's what he was using because he inherited it from his grandfather. That's the way a lot of people get firearms, and a lot of people do not have the financial resources to go buy other firearms. So whether it's because of your local laws or your personal legal situation or your financial situation, a lot of people have certain firearms because those are the only firearms available to them. And that is the reason why someone would choose a bolt-action rifle as their home defense firearms, because they didn't choose it, the circumstances chose it. Now, if you're one of those people that's in that situation where you're using a bolt-action rifle as a home defense firearm because that's what you have, there's a few things that I can tell you that might help you out a little bit. Let's take a look. In shooting a lever action rifle, I have actually seen people do it like this. No, when you work the lever, keep it in your shoulder. This is the way to get the optimum performance out of your lever action rifle. And you should do the same thing with your bolt action rifle. Let me show you what I mean. In shooting the Mosin, you saw me bring it out of my shoulder to work the bolt. That's because the rifle doesn't really fit me. It's very difficult for me to reach up there and get that bolt operating. Therefore, I have to bring it down to work it. Again, because the rifle doesn't really fit me. If you were stuck with this Mosin and it doesn't fit you, you might really consider cutting some of that stock off so that it does fit you. Now let me show you a rifle that does fit me. This is my Ruger Model 77, and although it's a fairly big rifle, you can see that it fits me. Let's shoot it. Much better than the Mosin. And again, we're talking about if you happen to have a bolt action rifle. We're not talking about going out there and picking one. And if you have one that doesn't fit you, try to do something to modify it so it does. Now, bolt action rifles can come in a vast array of different calibers, all the way from 22 long rifle up to 50 BMG and maybe even more than that. But a lot of the rifles that fall into the category of that's what you have because that's all you have are going to be fairly powerful rifles. 308 Winchester, 30-06, 7.62x54R, 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, and the list goes on. These are going to be rifles that will be powerful and have a tendency to penetrate through a lot of stuff, like clear out of your house and through the neighbor's house. And it's not like you can change the caliber of your rifle. However, I would recommend that instead of getting some kind of spear point full metal jacket or armor piercing ammunition, if possible, get some kind of soft point hunting ammunition. This won't really cure the problem, but it can alleviate it a great deal. The next thing I would tell you is that you have to learn to use a bolt action rifle. Now, depending on what caliber you have, ammunition for these rifles can be very expensive, but you don't have to always do live fire. You can get some snap caps, you can do loading and unloading drills. You have to learn to use the rifle. There's a lot of people that use these rifles incorrectly. Now, bolt action rifles have a reputation for being very reliable, and they can be. But I've had a fair number of malfunctions with them. I've seen a lot of people have a lot of malfunctions with them because they're using them improperly, and these malfunctions are almost exclusively shooter caused. I was talking about how you can't work the bolt when the safety is on. I've seen people trying to open their bolt and they get frustrated because they forget you have to disengage the safety. Let me tell you an anecdote about malfunctions on a bolt action rifle. I'm deer hunting with someone who's using a bolt action rifle. There goes a deer. Shooter comes up, takes the safety off, aims, but not like this, because this is someone who has done some on the range competition with these kind of rifles. So instead of bringing the rifle up like this, brings it up like this. Shoots, misses the deer, works the bolt, ejects that empty round into their hand, which goes back into the feed tray, tries to chamber a new round, and is getting a double feed of the new round and the expent casing that should have gotten knocked out, and is frustrated by, you got it jammed, you got it jammed, you got it jammed, what? Oh! Meanwhile, the deer are long gone. This is the kind of thing I have seen with bolt action rifles on many occasions. Another problem is people are notorious for short stroking them. And so they'll pull it back and not get it completely ejected, then go forward, and instead of chambering a new round, they're just trying to chamber the empty casing again. When you work rifles like this, you can't beat it with a hammer, but you got to remember it's meant to be used. Hard, hard, all the way back, hard forward, lock it down. You have to learn to use rifles like this. Bolt action rifles can be slow to load, slow to shoot, slow to reload. If you have one that's capable of using strip clips, get a few of them. They're inexpensive and readily available online. Today's presentation isn't really about tactics, but there are a couple of things about tactics that I do want to discuss. And I want to start with talking about some different mentalities that people have when it comes to tactics in home defense. And there are some mentalities that I do not necessarily agree or disagree with. I just want to point out that they exist. Now on this side, there's the mentality that some people have that in a home defense situation, you should, if possible, barricade yourself in a room, have your gun pointed at the door with one hand, and be calling 911 with the other hand. Don't get those two mixed up. And if they come in the room with you, deal with it. If they don't, just let them steal whatever it is they want to steal. Now that's a mentality that some people have. On the other side of that, there's a mentality that completely disagrees with that. People will say that you should, if possible, engage that intruder. Now, in the middle of those two mentalities is the mentality that some people have where the idea that you should barricade yourself, that's a great luxury and you should do that if you can, but the great majority of the time, you won't be able to. And so you're going to have to engage the intruder. Okay, well, wherever you fall in those mentalities is going to have a lot to do with you, your capabilities, what firearm you happen to have, the floor plan of your house, how many people live in that house, the configuration of the neighbors' houses, and the list goes on ad astra. And no one can decide what you should do except you. But if you're in a situation where you're going to try to engage that intruder, and we're talking about bolt action rifles, there's a couple of things I want to discuss. Now, there's a term, and there's different terms for it. Some people will call it broadcasting, some will call it telegraphing, and there's other terms. And it's when you show your firearm before you go around the corner. And it can look like this. And my firearm shows up before I do and broadcasts to everyone where I am. This is why we want to use a low ready position. Now some people will aim at a target and then they'll call this a low ready. No, I mean this is more like a low ready. And inside a house I might bring it back even more. There's some people have the mentality that you should have it back like this, so it's at least pointing in your direction of travel. I find that can still show up before I do. As where if I'm in a real low ready, then my gun and I can show up at the same time. This obviously becomes a concern when you're trying to do home defense with a long gun, some kind of rifle or shotgun. With something like this, that firearm shows up a long time before I do. Your adversary is going to have time to break for lunch before you show up. So we go to a low ready, and sometimes that has to be a really low ready. Now even from here, I can bring it into position quickly. It will also help if you have some kind of carbine or SBR. Now, this really becomes a concern when we're talking about bolt-action rifles. If you have some kind of scout rifle, that will help. But when we're talking about traditional hunting rifles or outdated military bolt-action rifles, they can be fairly long. Longer than a lot of military-type rifles, certainly longer than a lot of AKs or ARs or SBRs. And so when it comes to broadcasting your position, somebody has time to go on vacation before you show up. Now, the problem with having a rifle like this in a real low ready is that you've got to get it way back. But if you do, you and your rifle can show up pretty much at the same time. And it can still be fairly easy to bring into action. There's a problem too of when you bring it into action, that's sticking way out there in front of you. And if your adversary is pretty close, he can grab that barrel. Now, this is another thing about having a low ready as opposed to a high ready. If I come around the corner in a high ready and an adversary is right there, he can grab my barrel. In a low ready, if he grabs the barrel, I can still shoot him in the foot. And that can be really effective depending on what caliber you have. But even at that, bringing it out like this, you need your adversary to be some distance away. And so, with your long-barreled bolt-action rifle, you might be in a position where instead of your low ready looks like this, it might look like this, and your first shot will be from here. Now, will that be effective? If you're trying to shoot an adversary that's 50 meters away, probably not. But at home defense distances, let's give it a try. I have my Remington 783 rifle and have the target set up at 5 yards. And we'll see how fast and accurately I can come from my under-the-arm low ready, shooting from this position, and then work the bolt. Now, when I talked about using pump-action shotguns, I used the term pull rack, pulling the trigger, racking the slide, a simultaneous action, and it's one word, pull rack. Well, we have to invent a new term for using bolt-action rifles in this kind of situation, and I'm going to call it pull turn. Pull the trigger, turn the bolt. Now, because on most bolt-action rifles you're going to do this with the same hand, it can't be a simultaneous action, but it still has to be a simultaneous thought process. Pull turn. So let's see how fast I can shoot and work the bolt and how accurately I can hit the target. Let's try that again. Let's try one more shot. And another. And now really, one more. Now let's take a close-up look at the target. And here's our shots in no particular order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, not bad. So acceptable accuracy, the speed wasn't too bad, and shooting from down here is going to keep a lot more distance between your muzzle and your adversary than shooting from up here. But this is definitely a technique that's going to require a fair amount of practice. In demonstrating our modified low ready to shooting from an assault position technique, I was using a rifle in caliber .223 Remington. But the question was just brought up, if you had to do that technique with a rifle that was significantly more powerful, then how manageable would the recoil be? Okay, well, this is a Ruger M77 in caliber .338 Winchester Magnum. Let's give it a try. Seems fairly manageable. Let's try one more shot. Not too bad. Earlier I said there may be many reasons someone would use a bolt-action rifle as a home defense firearm, but I wanted to discuss two of them. The first one was because that's the only firearm you have available to you. So what's the second one? To discuss that, we're going to start with a demonstration. And for our demonstration, we're going to use our meat target. Now, for those who haven't seen it before, the meat target is leather couch skin, followed by pork steak pectorals, pork ribs, a bag of oranges to stimulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech police bullet stop. And I'm going to shoot this from a distance of 7 yards with my Smith & Wesson Model 686-6 with a 6-inch barrel. which is loaded with Remington High Terminal Performance 357 Magnum 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. So that's a fairly powerful handgun. Let's see what kind of damage I can do. He fell over. We're going to set him up again. Let's try another shot. Well, the ribs on the front of the target have big holes in them, and where projectiles hit the ribs, demolish them. We see a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue, and the ribs on the back of the target, we see smaller holes because the bullets have lost a lot of their velocity, but still, where projectiles hit ribs, shattered them. Now, as far as penetration, one of our projectiles was stopped somewhere in the target, one was stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target, and one made it through to about the 10th layer of fleece. I was only able to recover 2 of the projectiles because one is still in the target and I just can't find it. But let's take a look at these projectiles. And here's the 2 projectiles I recovered. One we see expanded a lot, and the other really didn't expand very much. I also found some bullet fragments scattered throughout the target. So we saw that if you have a 357 Magnum handgun and you load it with good ammunition, not necessarily great ammo, just good ammo, it can do a lot of damage to the intended target. But now let's put that in perspective. I have a new meat target set up, and I'm going to shoot this one with my Ruger M77, which is loaded with Remington green and yellow box, 338 Winchester Magnum, 225 grain pointed soft point. And again, I'll shoot from 7 yards. Normally I take the meat target apart before I show it to you. Today I'm going to have you go through the process with me. Now, the first thing we see is that on the back of the t-shirt, a lot of our orange lung tissue and meat was blown out of the wound cavity. We see that here on the front of our high-tech fleece bullet stop. I also see a hole through the back of our high-tech fleece bullet stop. This is about 120 layers, and it failed to stop our 338 Win Mag. Now remember, I only fired 1 shot. And there's the 1 hole through the ribs on the front. Our orange lung tissue is mangled. And again, remember, that's the results of 1 shot, not 3. Now, as far as our ribs on the back of the target, we see a lot of our orange lung tissue stuck to that hole, and we see that our exit hole is a pretty big hole. So what does this tell us? That 338 Win Mag is a whole lot more powerful than 357 Magnum? Yeah, we pretty much already knew that. But it shows us just how much more you can do with really powerful rifles than you can with a handgun, and it puts in perspective just how powerful things like 338 Win Mag, 300 Win Mag, 375 at H&H Mag really are. Now, what does this have to do with bolt-action rifles for home defense? It has to do with the notion that in some cases, some people may be concerned with defending their home against an intruder that isn't necessarily a human. I actually saw a news story about someone finding under his house an 18-foot python. I saw a news story about someone who had an alligator that came onto his porch. You may be concerned about your home being invaded by lions, tigers, bears. Oh my! And if you're someone in that type of situation where you might need something really powerful and where you really need a lot of power in 1 shot, then defending your home with a bolt-action rifle of the right caliber might be a good choice. Now, there's one more thing to add. I said that the 338 Win Mag went through 120 layers of fleece. I went back and looked. Some of the fleece I was using today is about twice as thick as what I typically use, and so it appeared to be more than it was. I counted, it was actually 64 layers of fleece, but I think the point is still made. So what are the takeaways from everything today? Well, of all the reasons someone might use a bolt-action rifle as a home defense firearm, we covered two. The second one being that someone is in a situation where they think that whatever intruder they may have will be more appropriately dealt with by 338 Win Mag than 38 Special. We also showed that compared to a lot of other firearms, bolt-action rifles are not all that practical as a home defense firearm. And I think for most people in most situations, a bolt-action rifle would be a poor choice. Which brings us back to point one. People are going to use bolt-action rifles because that's the only firearm to which they have access. And if you find yourself in that category, I hope some of the things we covered today can be helpful. So as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the Bolt Action Rifles for Home Defense video.